For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I am your host, Jay Black, and I am doing the long-awaited episode on playlists. And the reason I'm doing this today really is because we've just had a pretty angry episode, well, pretty angry might be an understatement, that is going to be part of a mini-series, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But more than anything, it was kind of a different sort of episode that I don't really want this podcast to be overall. I do want this to be a positive place, full of passion and love and against all the craft book nonsense, really. If you're interested in me ripping craft books to shreds, part 1, check that out. I'll put a link in the description if I remember to do it. If not, then it'll be on the Anything Adventures Elsewhere playlist. It'll also be on the homepage, because this should be going out straight after. And there's actually a dedicated playlist for that, or there will be at the time, so it's nice and easy to find. But also, the reason I wanted to do an episode on music now is because last month I started with the importance of music, and I thought it was cool to sort of reflect that and do more music stuff. So I thought it was cool to do a sort of music in-world and a music sort of out-of-world type deal. As always, I am not here to give writing advice. I am here to talk about my process, my craft, what works for me, things I find interesting, all that sort of stuff. If it works for you too, that is great. If it doesn't, well, that's kind of not my problem, so let's get into it. I mean, this isn't just about playlists in my writing, they're also going to be music recs for what it is worth. Before we get into the real meat of this, I want to give a special mention to a new song by a band called Queens of the Stone Age, who I did mention in the Importance of Music episode. They relatively recently released a new album called In Times New Roman, which is fantastic, by the way. But I think it's the last song is called Straight Jacket Fitting, for some reason. I haven't figured that out yet. Definitely like that. And there's a section, I'm just going to pause the song I'm listening to for a moment, give me a second, called, that right at the end, towards the end of the song, there's this big section about sort of facing your inner demons. And the way it's done is just so masterful. Like the way the vocals are layered and mixed and panned, and the intonation and everything is so masterfully done that it's a masterpiece. There's no other way of putting it. It really is. I mean, that album takes all the mixing conventions and throws it out of the window, which is A, really brave, and B, genius, and I love that. But that song, that moment, is one that stuck with me right from the first listen. Such a powerful moment, I really can't praise it enough. I can't. So how playlists help me as a writer, I mean, yes, I'm a composer, I mean, you can probably tell from that big tangent I went on, I'm a big composer and music fan anyway. But how playlists help me, I mean, it's the same as with podcasting to an extent, in the sense that they shut up all the little voices in my brain, and that's really helpful for me actually getting words out or down or whatever I'm doing at the time. And I'll even have music on with writing AU stuff, which is something I've been doing a lot of lately as of recording this episode, even though I kind of shouldn't be, but I'm doing it anyway because I need joy. They often, instead of helping much with the drafting, they actually help me a lot more in edits, bizarrely, potentially. Because the thing I have always had a problem with editing is overcutting, and just paring back absolutely everything that's not explicitly relevant, to the nth degree. It's like, oh, well, it's only minorly relevant. I guess I can cut it and cut out all the nice, delicious character moments and quiet moments. And so, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. I mean, especially if you're working across multiple genres, what you do and don't need to cut is very different. And having a playlist that sort of cements the vibe, the aesthetic, the genre, everything, keeping you in that mood, or keeping me in that mood, I should say, I find really, really helpful for avoiding that and getting the intricacies of each genre right, because the sort of vocabulary and wording and pacing, even within thriller subgenres, as someone who's written political thriller and romantic thriller and military thriller and other subgenres, it is slightly different. And trying to hone that in your own way, as opposed to following some shitty craft book template. Something like a playlist having a grounding point. I think that's the key thing, is the grounding point is really, really helpful. So let's talk a bit about how I make a playlist for a particular book, because I don't have just one for the term ones, I don't have that at all, actually. I have one for each project I'm working on. And sometimes that'll be in an unofficial sense, so my secret project that I haven't touched in months now is being written to the Cuphead soundtrack, which is actually what I'm listening to right now. I can't recommend that enough either, it's fantastic. But if I'm doing, say, a playlist for Shadow on the Snow or Penstemon or something like that, a lot of it, I take a first basis in genre. So Miss Nekagami, good example as any, jazz. I wanted to keep that in jazz as much as possible. With something like Snakebite, I wanted to keep it to sort of classical piano music. I have mentioned a little bit about how classical piano plays into Snakebite in the importance of music, and how Hanzo just really loves piano and stuff like that. So that was kind of a thing. I knew that was going to happen really early on. It doesn't actually happen in the book until pretty late, but the joys of being a pantser and the pain. I also, with genres, another good example is somewhat, I think what's interesting is the difference between Shadow on the Snow and Beneath the Moon, actually. Because they're projects that have a lot of parallels. They both very much centre around war, and they're both set in very, very similar parts of the continent. Even though it's technically two different nations, the settings are not very far apart at all. And they both felt like they needed some amount of metal soundtrack, but with Beneath the Moon, it felt a lot more, not industrial exactly, but had somewhat of a mechanical vibe to it. A lot of vengeance and stuff. I mean, it's a revenge thriller, so that makes sense. But with Shadow on the Snow, I didn't necessarily want that in the same way. I mean, there's a lot of anger and vengeance and all that. It's not a heroic playlist by any means, but it's a lot more just more straight anger and badassery, I guess. So while they might seem similar on the surface to those that don't know metal, they're actually not particularly similar, which I think is neat. And also timbre is something that really plays into a playlist. Now I should probably actually clarify that term for people that don't know it, because it is somewhat specialist. It's sort of like the texture of a song. So it's a bit more specific than saying like a vibe or aesthetic. It's like the actual texture, which I did touch on with Shadow on the Snow and Beneath the Moon, sort of the mechanical nature versus not having that. So with a few of the playlists, I do stumble quite far outside the genre, actually. I mean, particularly Penstemon. And it's about, there's a lot of, is it just a sad song? Is there something beautiful about it? And one thing I do try and do is match certain songs to certain moments. There are the sort of perfect moment songs on them, and songs with somewhat of an in-world equivalent that I do like to include. That's not true of every playlist, though. And writing to the perfect moment it can be a really great experience. I mean, that's something I did a lot with snakebite drafting, actually. Marcia Funebre came up quite a lot with certain scenes. I mean, I made no secret that snakebite's grim. It is. There's also, what's it called? Vocalize End of the Line, / End of the Line by Liz Wright, was also a really, really good one. Particularly, well, towards the end of the line, but I'm such a dingus. But that really, it can really help cement. Again, it's the sort of the vibe, the timbre, the aesthetic, getting that distilled as purely as possible. Which I genuinely don't think I could do to the same extent without the music there. I mean, I think I could edit it until it was there, but it would take a lot longer. And this is the other thing with playlists, they do help me write faster a lot, which is partly the shutting up the voices thing, but I don't know, it really, really helps with me, and I don't know whether other writers have said that. It'd be interesting to know if that is true for you too. I mean, if it is, let me know in the comments below. I mean, I also know that some people really hate having playlists going and only want to write in silence, so it'd be interesting to hear from you guys too in this sense. The other thing I want to talk about, we know, is the opposite of the perfect moments, is writing to something completely incongruent. And this is something I've done a fair bit with my secret project, and arguably with the AU I've been sort of dabbling in, and maybe bits of Pensament as well, and Miss Nakagami, but I'm going to go on all day if I carry on that note. Pun intended. Incongruence. I think this can be just as powerful as the perfect moment. In film score, this is called a sympathetic score, for what it's worth. And I think having that can be hilarious as much as anything. If you want to keep a touch of comedy in a really sad scene, having something really peppy in the background, and then it's a lot easier to throw the one line in, or sort of figure out what the one line is, or just all sorts. It can be really good for that. But it can also just sort of help you not get too bogged down in it. Maybe it's the undertone thing, I think, that really helps with the incongruence. This is the sort of the niche, the nuance of long form. You can get this in short form as well, don't get me wrong, but it's so much more pronounced in long form over a longer period of time, of all the undertones of everything, particularly, I think, as time goes on. And you get the really sort of the midpoint sad moments, and the sort of, is there a hopeful undertone? Is there a sort of, someone's about to crack a joke undertone and then they don't? There's all of that there, all of that layering, and that's a lot of fun to play with. And I think having incongruence can really help unlock that, because it's there in the background and you're not necessarily even listening to the song particularly, but it's there and it makes you absorb it. One thing I have seen a lot of writers talk about with writing with music in the background is lyrics versus instrumental. I've seen a lot of people say they don't care about lyrics. I've seen a lot of people say they can't write with lyrics. I'm one of those that doesn't care. I can write to whatever lyrics, it can be Ella Fitzgerald doing scratch vocals on Blue Skies that means absolutely nothing in the context of anything, necessarily. I don't care, that's fine. She can scream it in my ears, I don't mind. Or with something like End of the Line, having lyrics that really, again, hone into the perfect moment. There's one line, the way you glance at me indifferently. That one, for some reason, caught my attention. And I'm actually going to talk about Queen's a little here as well, because this is something Josh Homme does really well as a vocalist. There's one line in Villains, it's in Feet Don't Fail Me, I do believe, which is the first track on the album. Life is hard, that's why no one survives. And it's just sort of done as a throwaway, but you think, whoa, hold up a minute there. that's beautiful. Like, that's a heckin' line. And having a line like that while you're writing, I think, again, it hones that perfect moment, it hones everything. It can sometimes just provide that moment of clarity, where everything just stops for a moment. You think, yes. If you're a pantser, you know that feeling really, really well. I mean, I'm sure I'm just not a plotter, so I don't know when or if you guys have that. I mean, I'm sure you do. Don't get me wrong. Let me know, actually. I'll be genuinely really interested to hear that. But that moment, I think music can bring that about. Instrumental music can be really great for writing too. I mean, when it comes to writing Snakebite and having Chopin in the background, obviously all of that is instrumental. You know, instrumental music is just as powerful. It's just the same depth of emotion. It's just not as obvious, which is why it doesn't get played on the radio as much, basically. Imagine people still listening to radio. Good God, I'm old. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting, again, to hear your approach on those lyrics versus instrumental, because genuinely, I don't really give a shit. If the lyrics don't matter, I just sort of won't really pay attention. Having lyrics that really fit the perfect moment is something I do value. I do love that, and I try and have one of those at least on each playlist. With As Seen on Stage, it's more, but that's because there are more in-world equivalents and all that. But I did really enjoy writing to instrumental music with Snakebite, and it is something I will be doing again with As Seen on Stage, and it's interesting. It is a slightly different experience. It's more quiet. I think it's a bit more personal. In any case, that is sort of the end of the craft segment of that. So let's get into some playlist highlights, because believe me, this episode is not over. For Black Executioner, which is, for what it's worth, a straight thriller with the main character being a 39-year-old man in Ai Nagashima. I've got 3 picks from each playlist. For this, we got Left of Center by Serj Tankian. Serj Tankian is an absolutely fantastic vocalist and composer. I can't recommend his stuff enough. Streamlined by System of a Down is another, which is from the album Steal That Album. It's a really good album. Again, I highly recommend you check that out. And the slightly left field, not metal pick is a soundtrack pick, actually, from The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. It's no secret I'm a bit of a Zelda nerd. It's the Phase 4 of the final boss fight with Ganondorf. That is a really, really good piece of music. If you have the 25th anniversary concert CD from Zelda, there's an orchestral version of that in the Twilight Princess Symphony, and ooh boy, chills every time. For what it's worth, that was composed by Koji Kondo and Toru Minagishi. For Mr. Nakagami, the jazz fans, In a Sentimental Mood by Sonny Rollins. That is a really good piece of, actually, I think that one's instrumental, for what it's worth. The Very Thought of You by Ella Fitzgerald is, that song is so good. And it is an easy one to relate to as a writer, because there's the line, the very thought of you, and I forget to do the little ordinary things that everyone ought to do. And if that isn't us, just thinking about our books and writing, I don't know what is. I'm calling myself out here too, don't think it's just you. The other one from Miss Nakagami is Putting on the Ritz, which I did mention in the importance of music, because that is just such a good let's dance to this song. It's quite sassy as well, I think. As Seen on Stage, more jazz. I Just Dropped By to Say Hello by Johnny Hartman. I don't know, that man's voice is... oh boy, I love it. I really, really do. It's, I think, maybe a bit more of a niche pick from this playlist, because I've also got Moanin' by Art Blakey on there, and that one, I will confess, is 15 minutes long. But it's worth listening to every single second. It's so good. It really is. It's actually a live recording, at least the one I have. I don't know if there's a recording of it that isn't live. I've not really looked into Art Blakey as much as I should, to be honest, but that's a really, really good piece of jazz. Another one that's a bit more modern is Clip Joint Calamity by Christopher Madigan, who is the Cuphead guy. It would have been serendipitous for that to be the song playing in my ears at the moment, but it's not. If it comes on while I'm still recording, I will let you know. But that's a really good one. The sax solo? Woof. That's amazing. I can't tell you enough how amazing that sax solo is. Then number 4, In the Eyes of the Desert. This is a project I haven't started drafting yet as of recording this, but I like to make playlists in advance of that now because it helps so much with writing faster, nailing things faster, and all of that I've mentioned already. We've got some slightly odd picks here. I do not know how to say this word, so I apologise. It is on the screen if you want to correct me. I genuinely don't know how to say this. Almakua by Hydelic. This is, for what it's worth, from the Tetris Effect soundtrack, which I also can't recommend enough. Absolutely fantastic work. It's not quite instrumental, there are some vocals, but it's a very sort of drum-heavy piece of all the kettle drums and stuff like that. I'm not quite sure exactly which drums were in it, so I'm not going to specify. But that's a really, really good piece of music. A couple of others that, if you know Queens of the Stone Age, you'll realise what In the Eyes of the Desert is like. Like Clockwork, it's not only an album, but also a song that is very, very good. And also Villains of Circumstance, which is interesting actually. Those two are the last tracks from 2 different albums. Hadn't noticed that until right now. Well, actually, that's not true. I'm sure I noticed it at the time I was making the playlist, but this is pre-Coffee Brain, so we're not gonna hold me to account on that one. But they're both very quiet songs at the start and get loud and go quiet again. That fits In the Eyes of the Desert, I think, she says, having not written a single word of it. Shadow on the Snow is the one playlist so far I've actually bought a song for. I bought My Disintegration by Celldweller, which is a song I cannot recommend enough. It is a fantastic piece of sort of electronic metal, I guess. It's quite a long one, but it's very, very good. The other picks I have, The Day Is My Enemy by The Prodigy. The Prodigy do have some real gems. I'm a pretty big Prodigy fan, honestly. Maybe a bit more their later stuff. But they do have some songs that I would say are unarguably good. The Day Is My Enemy, I would say is one of them, which is the title of the album it's from, by the way. Another pick from that is Assassin by Muse. So yeah, Shadow on the Snow is a bit out there in terms of genre and all that, because there are a few there. I mean, Assassin by Muse just made sense because, he's an assassin. As much as anything else. Snakebite, mentioned a couple of these before, March Funèbre by Chopin, piece of classical music that, again, is actually really quite long. It's like 8 minutes 40 is the version I have, I think. But it's really good. End of the Line by Les Wright, I did also mention. The one I've mentioned on social media, but not today, is Tears in Her Eyes by Mini Mansions. And Mini Mansions are really underappreciated band. They're very, very good. Their stuff, on the first listen, can be a little bit difficult to take. They are very much growers, all of their albums so far. But Guy Walks Into a Bar is where Tears in Her Eyes is from. And that's a very good album. I did actually write a lot of Snakebite to that album, which was just completely incongruous, but it was good fun. I'd recommend that very highly. The Elegance of a Pentiment is a playlist that I'm glad I don't have to listen to anymore. I actually messaged a friend about that after finishing edits, because it was just on loop for like weeks on end, and it got tiresome. I'll admit. So the big song from that definitely is February Stars from Foo Fighters. I'm sure you probably all know that song. It's very, very good. Numb by Linkin Park is also on there. And the left field pick, and this playlist is definitely out there on genre, Unfold by Hydelic, which is also from the Tetris Effect soundtrack, which I can't recommend enough. That song is one of the best on that soundtrack. It is just, it's so beautiful. It really is. That's one I definitely picked for Tombra, because it's just this beautiful, sort of grand yet quiet piece. It's really good. And last but certainly not least, or Helga will throw an axe at my head, Beneath the Moon. Oxygalation by Static X is on there. Lots of mechanical sounds in the intro of that. It's really, really cool. I believe that one is from Wisconsin Death Trip. If I've got that wrong, correct me. Glow by Cold Chamber is also on there. The intro to that song, top notch. It's really, really good. Also Cold by Static X is on there, which is, I think Static X is like really famous song. So yeah, those are my playlist recommendations. Bits for everybody across all genres, really. I mean, we got classical, we got jazz, we got metal, we've got more standard rock music, we got some weird stuff in Mini Mansions, we got soundtrack picks that straddle a few different genres, so feel free to check a few of these out. I believe all of them are available on Amazon Music. I don't believe they are on Spotify, because there are a lot of copyright restrictions nowadays, but yeah. I mean, Ganondorf Phase 4 might not be available on Amazon Music. That was something that was... There is a soundtrack CD for Twilight Princess that was bought for me. I don't know where it came from, but it does exist for what it's worth, and it's a very good CD, and I recommend it. Last but not least for the episode, I think it's appropriate that this is a chonker, by the way. If you are published or well on the way, please do get in touch. The way I'm doing that is a little bit different, in the sense that I only want to hear about this via email now. There is a list of stuff I want you to tell me about in the description below. Please do read that first, or because I don't want to give people automatic no's if I get inundated. So take the time and make sure it's right. The people I want to hear from most are people who are indie and self-pub. If you're a trad pub, that doesn't necessarily mean I won't talk to you. No restrictions on genre or age category or anything like that. It doesn't have to be a novel, it can be a short story collection, it can be a novella, it can be all kinds of stuff. You know, bring your poetry, bring your haikus, whatever, I'm interested. Bring me something that I don't know about. If you got something really weird that I'm not going to know about, bring it in, I want to hear about it. Also, it doesn't have to be new, it can be, it doesn't have to be out yet. I mean, I'm happy to talk about stuff, for pre-orders going live. It can also be, 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old. I don't care. If it's cool, bring it. Also, where I am elsewhere. This is slightly different now. Twitter is where I used to take some sort of interview requests. That's sort of the home of my writing now, at jblack21. If you are looking for the home of this podcast, which you probably are, that is Instagram. I am Jade_Black21 on there, but that is where you get early title reveals of episodes and little snippets and teasers of things I've said. And if that's your jam, if you want to hear about stuff in advance, check out my Instagram, but that's where it is. If you're more interested in my art or just random whatever, BlueSky is the place for that. If you have an invite code, if you've been invited to BlueSky, that's the place to be for random. All that stuff will also go elsewhere as relevant. JBlack21 for what it's worth. It should be mentioned with any big announcements, like new podcast episodes, any big writing announcements, any big art announcements I have. Those will go across all the platforms. Maybe not YouTube, just because this is supposed to be a podcast thing, although if it's big enough for me to make a really big announcement, there will probably be a dedicated podcast episode or other video about that. But I reckon that's about all I have to say for now. So, Throwing Calamity still hasn't come on, by the way. Which is a shame, but anyway, I'm nattered for long enough. We're over half an hour recording this, so you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so you don't miss future content. Copyright J Blank 2023.